Los Angeles was supposed to be a city of light. In 1939, Hollywood sold dreams to the world: silver screens, smiling faces, promise wrapped in neon. But behind that glow, something darker was moving, something quiet, something patient. Young women began to disappear into fear. It started with whispers. A woman attacked here, another injured there. No clear pattern, no witnesses who could point a finger, no motive anyone could understand. The police had no name, no face, only a growing sense that someone was hunting in the dark.
Don't always look dangerous. Sometimes they look ordinary. An unremarkable man. DeWitt Clinton Cook did not look like a killer. Born in Waterloo, Iowa, he grew up without distinction. No brilliance, no promise, no obvious cruelty. What he did have were early run-ins with the law, petty crimes, bad decisions, short tempers.
He dropped out of school early and spent 11 months at the Iowa State School for Boys. It didn't change him.
At 16, Cook moved with his parents to Los Angeles, chasing opportunity like thousands of others. But opportunity never came. Instead, tragedy did. His father died in a car accident, leaving the family fractured and financially fragile. By his early 20s, Cook was married to his first cousin, Lorraine Levy. The marriage itself raised eyebrows, but little else. They lived quietly at 1300 North Sycamore Avenue, sharing the home with Cook's mother, Ruby. Cook worked as a printer for a Hollywood trade paper. $24 a week. Enough to survive, not enough to dream. To neighbors, he was forgettable. To police, invisible. To the city, nothing at all. That invisibility would soon become lethal. February 1939, a normal walk. Friday night, Los Angeles City College. Students moved between buildings. Rehearsals ended. Laughter faded. The campus emptied in the soft California night. Anna Susuva, 32 years old, student and performer, walked alone along a familiar campus path. She had taken it countless times before. There was no reason to be afraid. She never saw him. Cook later claimed he had wandered onto campus after failing to find a house to burglarize. No plan, no target, just drifting, until chance placed a weapon in his hand. A loose 2x4 piece of timber lay near a bench. He picked it up. At around 9 p.m., Anna walked past him. Cook followed, just for a moment. Then he raised the wood and struck her from behind. The blow fractured her skull, instantly sending her collapsing to the ground. He dragged her toward a nearby tree, out of the path's direct line of sight. She moaned, tried to speak. Cook pressed his hand over her mouth. She wouldn't go silent. Panicking, he fled. No theft, no robbery, no reason except violence. Minutes later, a campus officer found Anna barely conscious, blood pooling beneath her head. Her ear was bleeding, her face swollen. She whispered only 4 words. "Oh, he hit me." She died at 1:20 a.m. A walk across campus had become a murder. A crime with no face. Police searched through the night. They found the 2x4 leaning against a tree, strands of blonde hair stuck to it. Gloves nearby, one smeared with blood, the other marked with blood and lipstick matching Anna's own. Footprints stained the path. But in 1939, there was no DNA, no cameras, no databases, only fragments. The city waited, and the attacker walked free. March 28, 1939, another shadow. 1 month later, the pattern repeated. Delia Bogard, a dancer and studio performer, walked home from the movies near her Hollywood neighborhood. She sensed someone behind her. She turned too late. A man lunged from the dark and struck her with a wooden plank, nearly identical to the one used on Anna. She screamed. This time, the attacker ran. Neighbors rushed out. Delia lay bleeding unconscious. She survived, but barely. Police found another discarded piece of wood. Still, no connection was made. The city didn't yet realize it was dealing with one man, or that he was escalating. What no one knew yet. 3 women. 1 dead. 2 barely alive. Different locations. Same method. No motive. Los Angeles still believed these were isolated incidents. They were wrong, because while police chased ghosts, DeWitt Clinton Cook was still out there, growing bolder, learning from each attack, waiting for the next opportunity. And the worst violence was still ahead. Los Angeles did not panic right away. Cities rarely do. After Anna Sasuva's murder and Dalia Bogard's assault, police labeled the cases unrelated. Different neighborhoods. No eyewitnesses. No stolen property. No clear motive. In a city of millions, randomness felt easier to accept than the idea of a predator moving freely. But violence does not stay quiet forever. By early summer of 1939, fear began to change shape. Women altered routines. Campuses emptied earlier. Streetlights felt weaker. And somewhere in Hollywood, brutality crossed a line that could no longer be ignored. June 27, 1939, a crime too loud to ignore. Margaret Campbell was not a student. She was not young. She was not alone on a dark street. She was an actress, one who had lived through the silent film era and survived Hollywood long enough to grow older in it. On June 27th, she was found inside her home, sexually assaulted and beaten to death with a hammer. The crime scene was devastating. Blood, fury, a level of violence far beyond the earlier attacks. Police immediately focused on the most obvious suspect, her son, Charles MacDonald Campbell, a man with a troubled mental history. The evidence pointed inward, not outward, and eventually, Charles would be committed to Patton State Hospital for the criminally insane. For a moment, the city exhaled. Investigators even wondered if the same man might somehow be responsible for the earlier assaults on Anna Sasuva and Dalia Bogard. It would have explained everything. One violent mind. One explanation. But the theory collapsed under scrutiny. Timelines didn't match. Methods didn't align. And most importantly, the attacks did not stop. The real predator keeps moving. While police focused elsewhere, DeWitt Clinton Cook continued walking the streets of Los Angeles. He had not been frightened by Anna's death. He had not been deterred by Dalia's survival. Instead, he adapted. By late August, there were still no arrests for Anna's murder. No resolution. No justice. The city was restless. Patrols increased, but officers were still looking for the wrong kind of suspect, someone obvious, someone violent-looking, someone who stood out. Cook blended in. August 24th, 1939, inside the home. This time, the attack didn't happen on a street or campus. It happened where safety was supposed to be absolute. Myrtle Wagner, just 17 years old, worked as a domestic servant for the Lippman family. On that Thursday evening, she sat alone in the kitchen, quietly crocheting a towel. No noise, no warning, no chance. A man entered the house. Cook struck her from behind with a blunt object again and again. The blows were so vicious that Myrtle would need a cane to walk for weeks afterward. She never had the chance to scream. The attack was sudden, intimate, and feral. Something startled him, perhaps footsteps elsewhere in the house. He fled. Myrtle survived, and for the first time, police could no longer deny it. The pattern becomes clear. 3 women attacked, 1 murdered, 2 nearly killed. Same method, same kind of victim, same geographic pocket of Hollywood. Captain Dalton, R. Patton, and Deputy Chief Homer B. cross-issued urgent orders. Patrols were increased. Officers were given timelines, descriptions, and instructions to aggressively canvass neighborhoods. This was no longer coincidence. Los Angeles had a predator, and he was getting reckless. August 28, 1939, the mistake. Just 4 nights later, Cook made the mistake that would end everything. Mr. and Mrs. W. F. Warwick were inside their Hollywood home on Oakwood Avenue. Mrs. Warwick had just finished dressing for an evening out. Her husband sat nearby with their daughter and dog. She returned to the bedroom and froze. A stranger stood in front of her dresser, a man in a brown suit. She screamed. The intruder reacted instantly, diving through an open window and vanishing into the night. But this time, police were close. The net tightens. Sergeants Eli Berger and A.D. McCool canvassed the neighborhood immediately. Within a short distance, they spotted a man who didn't belong. DeWitt Clinton Cook. On him they found an 18-inch piece of wood, a long screwdriver, a pocket knife, several pairs of gloves. His shoes, tennis shoes, would later be matched to footprints at Myrtle Wagner's assault scene. When officers searched his home, they found moccasin shoes. The soles matched the unusual footprint pattern found beside Delia Bogard's unconscious body. The puzzle pieces finally locked together. As Cook was placed in the back of the police car, officers noticed something strange. A scrap of wood lay on the seat, left over from a previous repair job. Cook saw it and said quietly, "My God, not that." The silence breaks. In interrogation, Cook denied everything at first, but the evidence was relentless. The gloves, the shoes, the footprints, the weapons, the locations. Hour after hour, the walls closed in. Finally, Cook broke. He confessed to Anna Sasuva's murder, to the assaults on Delia Bogard and Myrtle Wagner, to other burglaries and violent acts. When asked about Anna, he said words that chilled even seasoned investigators. She screeched a little, so I hit her some more. There was no emotion, no justification, only fact. Los Angeles finally had its monster. But the story was far from over, because what followed would change California legal history forever. When DeWitt Clinton Cook confessed, Los Angeles did not react with shock. It reacted with relief. For months, fear had drifted through Hollywood like smog. Women were attacked without warning. No motive made sense. No suspect fit the image people wanted to believe in. Now, there was a name, a face, a man in custody. The city could finally point somewhere and say, "That's him." But for the detectives who sat across from Cook, relief did not come so easily. Because Cook didn't behave like a man who had been cornered. He behaved like a man who had finished his story. Inside the interrogation room, Cook was calm, not defiant, not emotional, not desperate. He answered questions directly, almost mechanically. He corrected officers when they got details wrong. He described locations with precision. He explained how he chose his victims, not by name, not by hatred, but by opportunity. He said he didn't plan to kill Anna Sasuva. He said he hadn't meant for things to go that far. But when pressed, his words told a different story. He described picking up the 2x4, described following her, described the sound she made when she fell, and then he said something that haunted the room. That once she started making noise, he felt panic, not guilt. Noise meant witnesses. Noise meant consequences. To Cook, the problem wasn't what he was doing. The problem was being heard. The evidence closes in. Investigators laid everything out. The gloves found near Anna Sasuva's body, lipstick matched to her purse, the blood-stained timber, the footprints at multiple scenes, the shoes recovered from Cook's home, eyewitness descriptions from the Warwick residence. Every piece fit. Cook didn't fight it. He didn't cry. He didn't plead. He didn't ask for a lawyer. He simply talked. By the time the interrogation ended, officers realized something chilling. Cook wasn't confessing to escape pressure. He was confessing because, in his mind, the story was complete. Public reaction. News broke quickly. Hollywood papers ran bold headlines. Radio announcers spoke his name with gravity. Neighbors replayed details in whispered conversations. People wanted to understand why. But Cook offered no philosophy, no manifesto, no emotional explanation. There was no grand motive to dissect. That frustrated the public. Monsters are easier to process when they come with reasons. Cook gave none. Instead, the focus shifted to what would happen next. Because this case wasn't just about guilt. It was about how justice would show guilt. Preparing for trial. The trial date was set for October 4th, 1939. Deputy District Attorney Eugene Blaylock led the prosecution. He understood immediately that this case was different. The evidence was strong, but the crimes were complex, spread across time and space, involving multiple victims and scenes. Blaylock didn't want the jury to imagine what happened. He wanted them to see it. Cook's defense was handled by public defenders. There would be no dramatic strategy, no plea of innocence, no alternative suspect. Cook never entered a plea of not guilty. That alone unsettled the courtroom. The unprecedented decision. On October 11th, something happened that had never occurred in California courtroom history. The prosecution introduced sound motion pictures as evidence, not photographs, not diagrams. Moving images with audio. Jurors watched film footage of crime scenes. They heard officers narrate events. And then, they watched Cook himself. In the film, Cook reenacted Anna Sasuva's murder. He demonstrated how he struck her. He explained his movements. He spoke calmly, without hesitation, as if narrating a task rather than a killing. There was no background music, no dramatic editing, just reality. For the jurors, this was not testimony filtered through lawyers. It was the crime unfolding in real time. Several jurors later admitted they struggled to sleep after viewing it. A courtroom frozen. As the footage played, Cook sat still. No reaction. No discomfort. No attempt to look away. Observers noticed something unsettling. He wasn't reliving the crime. He was reviewing it. Almost clinically. The courtroom felt different after that day. The energy shifted. The defense had nothing to counter such evidence. Cook didn't object. He didn't interrupt. He watched himself confess on film and said nothing. Deliberation. By October 13th, the case was over. The jury deliberated for 40 minutes. Not hours. Not days. 40 minutes. The verdict was guilty. There was no visible reaction from Cook. He didn't slump. He didn't argue. He didn't show relief or fear. His expression barely changed. Some reporters described it as emptiness. Others called it indifference. But those closest to the case would later say something else. Cook had already accepted the ending long before the jury spoke. Sentencing. On October 18, 1939, Judge Ambrose delivered the sentence. Death. Execution by gas chamber at San Quentin Prison. Cook stood silently. No final speech. No plea. No collapse. He was transferred by train on October 26 to San Quentin, where he would wait. And wait. But the story was not finished. Because Cook would soon write words that forced the state of California to confront a difficult question. Was execution the only answer? San Quentin Prison, late 1939. DeWitt Clinton Cook arrived without ceremony. No crowd. No spectacle. Just paperwork, iron gates, and the finality of concrete walls closing behind him. He was assigned a cell on death row. Small, narrow, stripped of anything unnecessary. A place designed not for living, but for waiting. Most condemned men unraveled there. Cook did not. Guards noticed it immediately. He followed routines precisely. Ate when told. Slept when lights went out. Spoke only when spoken to. There were no outbursts, no breakdowns, no visible fear of the gas chamber waiting at the end of the corridor. What unsettled people was not what he did. It was what he began to write. A mind still at work. Within weeks, Cook requested writing materials. At first, officials assumed it was normal, letters to family, perhaps a final statement. But what came out on those pages was neither apology nor farewell. It was analysis. Cook began documenting his thoughts with chilling clarity. He wrote about his crimes not emotionally, but structurally, how opportunity shaped action, how panic replaced conscience, how noise mattered more than suffering. He described his inner state as if dissecting a machine rather than a human mind. He did not excuse himself. He did not condemn himself either. Instead, he framed his actions as symptoms. I knew what I was doing, he wrote in one letter, but knowing does not mean understanding why the impulse arrives. That sentence circulated quietly among prison officials. Then it reached lawyers. The letter that changed the conversation. One document stood apart from the rest. Cook addressed it to the Supreme Court of California. It was not a plea for mercy. It was a challenge. He argued that execution would answer nothing, that killing him would silence a body, not explain a mind, that his case represented something the law was not prepared to face, violent behavior without motive, without ideology, without madness that could be neatly diagnosed. He claimed responsibility. But he questioned certainty. Punishment assumes choice, he wrote. I question how free that choice was. The language was precise, educated, unemotional. For the first time since his arrest, Cook wasn't confessing. He was provoking. Psychiatrists enter the story. The letter forced action. State officials ordered a series of psychiatric evaluations. Some believed this was a formality, a box to check before execution. Others sensed something deeper. Doctors interviewed Cook for hours. What they found disturbed them. He was not delusional, not psychotic, not intellectually impaired. He understood right from wrong. Yet he described his actions as inevitable, not fated, but internally driven, like gravity acting on an object already falling. He spoke of impulses arriving fully formed, without emotional buildup, without anger or pleasure. No hatred, no thrill, no remorse, just action. The psychiatrists disagreed among themselves. Some labeled him a psychopath. Others resisted the term, arguing it explained nothing. One report concluded with a line that would echo for years. Cook demonstrates moral awareness without moral resistance. Public reaction turns uneasy. When news leaked that the state was reconsidering aspects of Cook's execution, outrage followed. Headlines turned sharp. Why was a confessed murderer being studied instead of executed? Why were the victims' families being forced to wait? Why was the system listening to the words of a killer? Anna Sasuva's name resurfaced in print. So did Delia Bogard's. So did Myrtle Wagner's. For many, the answer was simple. He deserved to die. But behind closed doors, something else was happening. Legal scholars began to argue that Cook's case was testing the limits of criminal responsibility, that his filmed confession, his writings, his psychological profile were exposing a gap in how the law understood violence. This was no longer just about guilt that had been settled in 40 minutes. This was about what justice meant when motive dissolved. A precedent takes shape. The Supreme Court did not overturn Cook's sentence, but they did something unexpected. They delayed it. Weeks turned into months. Cook remained on death row, writing more letters, answering more questions, becoming, unwillingly or not, a living case study. Universities requested transcripts. Law reviews cited his words. Psychiatrists debated his mind in journals. The gas chamber waited. So did the state, because executing Cook now meant closing a door that had only just been opened, and everyone knew it. The question was no longer whether he would die. It was whether California was ready to do it, knowing what it now knew. Death row was not silent. San Quentin Prison, late 1939. Behind thick concrete walls and iron bars, DeWitt Clinton Cook entered a world designed to erase men slowly. Death row was not loud like Hollywood, not chaotic like the streets where he had hunted. It was quiet, measured, mechanical. Time moved differently there. Cook was assigned a small cell with a narrow cot, a steel toilet, and a slit of a window that allowed light, but no view. Guards noted something unusual almost immediately. He was cooperative, polite, almost relieved. Most condemned men cried. Some raged, others begged. Cook did none of those things. He followed routines precisely. He ate when told, slept when lights went out, spoke only when spoken to, unless a guard asked him a direct question. Then he answered calmly, carefully, as if giving instructions rather than opinions. But behind that calm exterior, Cook's mind was still active. And soon he began to write letters from a condemned man. Within weeks of arriving at San Quentin, Cook started sending letters, not just to his family, but to officials, doctors, lawyers, and journalists. These were not apologies. They were not confessions. They were arguments. Cook insisted he was not insane. He insisted he understood exactly what he had done. But he also insisted that executing him would serve no purpose. In one letter, he wrote that killing him would not bring Anna Sasuva back. It would not heal Delia Bogard. It would not erase Myrtle Wagner's nightmares. Instead, he argued, it would simply add another death to the list. What disturbed prison officials was not the logic but the tone. There was no remorse, no grief, no fear. Cook wrote like a man analyzing a problem from the outside, as if the subject of death was theoretical rather than imminent. He asked questions about the gas chamber. How long it took, what it felt like, whether consciousness faded quickly or lingered. Not out of terror, but curiosity. Psychiatrists began to take interest. The mental state debate. California law allowed execution only if the prisoner was mentally competent. If Cook could be proven insane, his sentence could be delayed or commuted. Multiple psychiatrists evaluated him. Their conclusions conflicted. Some described Cook as emotionally detached, morally empty, incapable of empathy. Others said he was fully aware of right and wrong, fully capable of controlling his actions. He did not hallucinate. He did not suffer delusions. He understood consequences. That distinction mattered, because if Cook was sane, the state could kill him. If he was insane, the state would have to wait. Cook himself complicated matters. He rejected insanity defenses outright. He told doctors he did not want to be labeled mentally ill. He did not want sympathy. He did not want excuses. What he wanted was control over how his story ended. A legal line is crossed. As Cook's execution date approached, his attorneys filed a last-ditch appeal, not arguing innocence but constitutionality. Their claim was simple and explosive. Execution by gas chamber was cruel and unusual punishment. No one had seriously challenged the gas chamber before. It had been used quietly, efficiently, without public scrutiny. Cook's case forced the courts to look directly at the method itself. What actually happens in the chamber? How long does suffering last? Is death immediate or prolonged? Medical experts testified. Prison officials described procedures. Witnesses from past executions spoke of visible convulsions, gasping, clawing at restraints. Suddenly, Cook was no longer just a murderer on death row. He was the center of a legal earthquake. The California Supreme Court reviewed the appeal. For weeks, Cook waited. He did not pray. He did not pace. He did not beg. Guards reported he spent hours staring at the wall, hands folded, unmoving. When asked how he was holding up, he reportedly replied, "I already know the ending. I'm just waiting for the credits." Decision day. In early 1940, the ruling came down. The court rejected Cook's appeal. The gas chamber was deemed constitutional. Execution would proceed. The decision sent shockwaves through legal circles. Cook's challenge failed, but it opened a door that would later be forced wider by others. His case would be cited for decades in debates over capital punishment. For Cook, the ruling changed nothing. He thanked his attorneys politely, returned to his cell, resumed his routine. But something did change. He began writing fewer letters. The end becomes real. As the execution date drew closer, the prison chaplain visited Cook. The chaplain offered prayer, repentance, forgiveness. Cook listened patiently, then declined. He said he believed in God, but not in confession as a transaction. He did not believe saying the right words at the last moment erased anything. He did not ask to see his wife. He did not ask to see his mother. When asked if he had any regrets, he paused, then said, "I regret being interrupted." It was the most chilling statement recorded in his final weeks. February 12, 1940, the final night. The night before the execution was quiet. Cook ate his final meal without comment. Records note, he did not request anything special. No steak, no dessert, just standard food consumed slowly. At 11 p.m., guards checked his cell. Cook was awake. At midnight, they checked again. Still awake. He was not pacing, not trembling, not crying, just waiting. Witnesses later said it felt as if Cook had already left the world mentally. His body simply hadn't caught up yet. February 13, 1940, the gas chamber. Shortly after midnight, Cook was escorted to the execution chamber. Witnesses included prison officials, doctors, and reporters. The room smelled of disinfectant and cold metal. Cook walked on his own. He did not resist. He did not stumble. He did not look at the witnesses. When asked for final words, he said only, "I have nothing to add." The straps were secured. The door sealed. The gas released. Witnesses later described visible tension in his body, a tightening of muscles, shallow movements. Accounts varied on duration. Some said minutes, others longer. Eventually, the doctor pronounced him dead. Time of death officially recorded. The chamber was ventilated. The witnesses left. The body was removed. Los Angeles slept. What remained? Cook's execution did not end fear immediately. It did not undo trauma. Survivors carried scars for life. Families buried grief that never fully healed. But his case left a deeper mark. It changed how evidence was presented in court. It challenged execution methods. It forced society to confront what justice really meant. Cook died as he lived, controlled, detached, unrepentant. And yet, long after the gas faded and the headlines disappeared, one question remained, echoing through legal history and human conscience alike. Did killing him make the world safer? Or just quieter? Aftermath and legacy. Los Angeles in 1940 tried to return to normal. The streets no longer carried the same tense uncertainty, but the memory of Cook's crimes lingered like smog over Hollywood. Women walked more cautiously. Parents warned their children about strangers. Even in the brightest cafes and movie theaters, whispers of the man with the 2x4 could be heard. For the city, the end of Cook's life did not erase the terror he inflicted. Survivors like Delia Bogard and Myrtle Wagner carried both physical and psychological scars. Delia spent weeks recovering from her head injury. Nightmares followed her for years. Myrtle's cane was a constant reminder of that Thursday evening when her life nearly ended. Cook's wife, Lorraine Levy, quietly petitioned for an annulment while he was on death row. By May 24, 1940, it was granted. Friends and family rarely spoke of him afterward. His mother, Ruby, moved from the Sycamore Avenue home, leaving behind the memories of a son who had become a city's nightmare. Legal innovations. One of the lasting impacts of the case came from the trial itself. California's legal system had never before seen sound motion pictures used as evidence. Prosecutors had not merely described the crimes, they had shown them, visual reenactments, audio commentary, Cook's own words. It allowed jurors to experience events with a clarity that testimony alone could never achieve. The success of this method set a precedent. Future trials began incorporating photography, film, and eventually video to provide juries with more accurate interpretations of evidence. Cook's crimes were horrific, but his trial revolutionized courtroom procedures in ways that continue to affect legal proceedings decades later. The public's fascination. Cook's story was sensationalized by newspapers and radio. Headlines emphasized the randomness of his attacks, his eerie calm during confession, and the use of cutting-edge trial technology. Readers were both horrified and morbidly fascinated. Hollywood, already a city of stories, treated the narrative like a grim morality tale. While public attention shifted over time, historians and criminologists returned repeatedly to the case. Cook became a study in contrasts, an outwardly unremarkable man who concealed a violent inner life, a murderer who articulated his crimes with almost clinical detachment. Psychological analysis. Years later, criminologists studying Cook described him as demonstrating early signs of antisocial behavior, lack of empathy, impulsivity, and thrill-seeking. His early brushes with law in Iowa, his troubled family life, and his move to Los Angeles had shaped a personality capable of extreme violence. Yet his composure, both in crime and in punishment, suggested a man fully aware of consequences, but devoid of conventional morality. Some psychiatrists argued he was a psychopath in the clinical sense, not insane, but morally and emotionally disconnected. Others debated whether he ever experienced true remorse. Survivors and witnesses described him as eerily calm, almost fascinated by his own actions. Even the chaplain at San Quentin noted that Cook approached the end with intellectual curiosity rather than emotional reckoning. Impact on capital punishment debate. Cook's execution also influenced debates about the death penalty. His appeal challenging the gas chamber as cruel and unusual punishment brought attention to methods of execution in California. While the appeal ultimately failed, it prompted legislators, lawyers, and prison officials to examine execution practices more critically. Cook's case became a reference point in discussions of humane treatment of prisoners' mental competence and the ethics of capital punishment. Societal reflections. Beyond the courtroom and prison, the city of Los Angeles grappled with the societal implications of Cook's actions. How could a man so ordinary appear so monstrous in action? How could neighbors, co-workers, even family, fail to detect the darkness within? Questions of awareness, prevention, and social responsibility arose in police training, neighborhood vigilance, and community dialogues. Cook's life and crimes forced the public to confront uncomfortable truths. Danger could appear ordinary, evil could wear an unremarkable face, and violence sometimes came without warning or reason. These lessons lingered, influencing law enforcement practices and community awareness long after the headlines faded. The human cost. Ultimately, the human toll was profound. Families mourned, survivors healed slowly, and the city's collective psyche was scarred. Cook's calculated detachment made him particularly terrifying. He did not need to rationalize his actions, he did not need to conceal his satisfaction. For those left behind, the psychological wounds were as lasting as the physical ones. Closing thoughts. DeWitt Clinton Cook's story is a cautionary tale on many levels. It is a study of human darkness, of how one individual's choices can ripple outward to affect hundreds. It is a story of legal innovation and courtroom evolution. It is a reminder that justice, while eventually served, cannot erase trauma, nor can it fully explain the motivations of those who commit unspeakable acts. Los Angeles eventually moved on, but the case became embedded in the city's history, a tale of fear, innovation, and the enduring question: how do we prevent such evil from returning, and how do we understand it when it inevitably does? The countdown to execution. DeWitt Clinton Cook spent his final months at San Quentin prison under constant supervision. He had little to occupy his mind. Reading material was sparse, the world outside the prison walls distant and unreachable. Yet he remained calm, a demeanor that unsettled both guards and fellow inmates. Where most prisoners might despair, rage, or plead for mercy, Cook seemed almost indifferent, as if he had already rehearsed his own end. Prison staff noted his unusual habits. He would listen to a small radio throughout the night, picking up broadcasts of baseball games, political speeches, and classical music. He refused regular meals, but accepted tea or water occasionally. Sleep came rarely. Some guards described him as waiting for the moment with quiet acceptance, a man who had come to terms with what lay ahead. Appeals and clemency. Even as the wheels of the legal system turned inexorably toward his execution, Cook and his legal team pursued every avenue for reprieve. A temporary reprieve was granted on November 25, 1940, after his initial appeal challenged aspects of the trial process and the fairness of his sentencing. Cook's attorneys filed petitions arguing procedural errors, the potential for mental evaluation, and even the application of capital punishment to someone so young. Cook himself submitted a formal clemency request on December 30th, 1940. In it, he wrote words that were both chilling and eerily rational. If I were older by 20 years, I would perhaps not wish for commutation, but I am a young man still. To me, life is life, whether in a penitentiary or elsewhere. I stand convicted of murder, but I am not a murderer in my heart. Surely this is the contingency for which the alternative penalty was prepared. There is no doubt in my mind that when my term expired, I would emerge a better man in all ways, spiritually, mentally, and physically. Governor Culbert L. Olson reviewed the petition. After consideration, the clemency request was ultimately denied on January 5, 1941. The law as it stood would be carried out. The final days. Cook's last days were routine, measured, and reflective in their own way. Prison staff described him as quiet, often reading the Bible or other philosophical texts. He spoke occasionally with the prison chaplain, but never sought to justify his actions or express deep remorse. His focus seemed more on the passage of time than on the impending execution itself. On January 30th, 1941, he wrote letters to relatives and a few friends. The tone was detached, almost clinical. To the outside world, it was a final acknowledgement of mortality, stripped of drama, stripped of fear, stripped of apology. The morning of execution, January 31st, 1941, dawned cold and gray over San Quentin. At precisely 10:02 a.m., DeWitt Clinton Cook was escorted to the gas chamber. Witnesses later described him as calm, composed, and deliberate. He refused breakfast. He made no last-minute pleas for mercy. His final words to a guard were simple. "I have made up my mind. I have to go." He entered the chamber without hesitation. The mechanism was activated. In the final moments, Cook reportedly maintained a composed demeanor devoid of panic or struggle. The aftermath of death. With Cook executed, a chapter of horror officially closed. Los Angeles could breathe easier, at least on the surface. The fear that had gripped Hollywood for nearly a year was gone, replaced by relief, mourning, and reflection. Families of victims and survivors experienced closure, though trauma lingered. But Cook's case left behind more than just memories. It left legal precedents, public fascination, and a blueprint for how the media, courts, and law enforcement would handle cases of extreme violence. The use of motion pictures with audio during the trial became a model for future prosecutions, ensuring that evidence could be presented in a way that transcended traditional testimony. Lessons and legacy. Criminologists and psychologists would study Cook for decades. He became a textbook example of antisocial behavior, psychopathy, and the unpredictable nature of human violence. His life demonstrated how outward normalcy can mask extreme internal deviance. His case was cited in law enforcement manuals, criminology textbooks, and psychological studies exploring early warning signs of violent behavior. Public memory also preserved the story. Newspapers, radio archives, and later historians ensured that DeWitt Clinton Cook's crimes, trial, and execution would not be forgotten. He became a cautionary tale about the hidden dangers in ordinary lives and the ways society, law enforcement, and legal systems respond to sudden, random, and extreme violence. Reflection. Cook's narrative forces reflection on justice, human behavior, and societal responsibility. He was an ordinary man on the surface, yet capable of extraordinary cruelty. The legal system responded with innovation and firmness, ultimately delivering justice, but the broader questions remained. How can communities prevent such acts? How can law enforcement recognize patterns sooner? And how do we reconcile the humanity of a criminal with the inhumanity of his actions? DeWitt Clinton Cook's story is grim, instructive, and unforgettable, a dark mirror reflecting both individual pathology and societal response. It serves as a reminder that evil often hides in plain sight, waiting for the chance to reveal itself. The trial that shook California. DeWitt Clinton Cook's trial was not just a criminal proceeding, it was a spectacle, a legal milestone, and a psychological puzzle all at once. When the court convened on October 4th, 1939, the public, press, and legal community were already on edge. Hollywood, accustomed to cinematic drama, now witnessed a drama far more unsettling because it was real. The courtroom was packed. Journalists jostled for position, eager to capture every detail. Citizens craned to see Cook, the man who had haunted the city's streets for nearly a year. His calm demeanor unnerved many. There was no fear, no panic, no remorse. Just a man who seemed fully in control, even within the confines of a room that could seal his fate. Prosecution and evidence. Deputy District Attorney Eugene Blaylock understood the stakes. The evidence, though compelling, required meticulous presentation. He had to ensure that jurors comprehended the full scope of Cook's crimes, the methodical nature of the repeated assaults, and the sheer randomness that had terrorized Los Angeles. Photographs of crime scenes were shown. Maps detailed locations, timelines, and patterns. But the crown jewel of the prosecution's case was unprecedented: sound motion pictures. Jurors watched footage of officers walking through crime scenes. They heard audio descriptions. Then, most strikingly, they saw Cook reenact the murder of Anna Sasuva. In the film, he demonstrated the attack on the campus path, spoke calmly as he mimicked the motions, and narrated his thought process. No embellishments, no theatrics, no dramatization, just a clinical recounting. Jurors described the experience later as immersive and haunting. It was the first time in California that moving images with audio were used in such a manner during a trial. Defense and dissonance. Cook's defense offered no alternative suspect, no plea of innocence, no emotional testimony. The public defenders were constrained, the evidence was overwhelming, and Cook himself refused to cooperate in ways that could help his own defense. He made no dramatic claims, no sudden bursts of emotion, no attempt to mitigate the narrative. His silence and indifference only deepened the courtroom tension. The jurors, 12 men chosen carefully, were left to reconcile what they saw. A man who admitted to brutal murders and assaults, explained them without remorse, and demonstrated them as though reciting facts from an everyday task. Jury deliberation. By October 13th, only 9 days after the trial began, deliberation was brief. 40 minutes. That was all it took for the jury to reach a unanimous guilty verdict. Some jurors later admitted the courtroom films and Cook's own reenactment left an indelible impression. Seeing the crime visually and hearing the calm narration made abstract horror concrete. Cook's reaction. He remained stoic. No sign of relief. No sign of defiance. No pleading or protest. Observers described his demeanor as almost mechanical, an emptiness that suggested he had accepted the inevitable long before the jury returned with its verdict. Sentencing. On October 18, 1939, Judge Ambrose sentenced DeWitt Clinton Cook to death in the gas chamber at San Quentin Prison. The sentence was clear, unambiguous, and final in the eyes of the law. Cook did not resist, did not argue, and did not react beyond his usual calm composure. Transport to San Quentin. Cook was transported by train on October 26, 1939. The journey, while long, was uneventful. Guards noted that he maintained his routine, reading, listening to the radio, and reflecting quietly. In these final days, the reality of the sentence seemed to weigh less on him than it did on those who guarded him, who watched with unease the serenity of a man condemned for multiple murders. Public fascination and media coverage. The case captured the imagination of Los Angeles and beyond. Newspapers reported extensively on the trial, Cook's confession, and the groundbreaking use of audiovisual evidence. Citizens discussed the case in cafes, offices, and homes. Hollywood, ever drawn to dramatic narratives, could not ignore a story that was real, terrifying, and unprecedented. The trial was dissected in newspapers and legal journals. Experts debated the psychological profile of Cook. How could a man appear so normal, so mundane, yet commit such acts of extreme violence? Psychologists and criminologists speculated about his upbringing, early brushes with the law, and possible hereditary or environmental influences. Legal precedent. The trial set a precedent in California. The use of sound films in a courtroom had never before occurred, and the success in presenting evidence in such a manner opened doors for future cases. It showed that jurors could grasp complex events more effectively when they could see and hear the sequence unfold rather than merely read about it or listen to descriptions. Cook's case would be studied for decades, not just as a criminal case, but as a turning point in the presentation of evidence. It influenced courtroom strategy, forensic psychology, and public perception of violent crime. Reflection on justice. Though the verdict and sentencing were decisive, questions lingered. Could society have prevented his crimes? Was the justice system swift enough, or were there warning signs ignored? How could a man so ordinary become so deadly without raising alarms earlier? DeWitt Clinton Cook became a case study in human behavior and the darker edges of normalcy. His actions left a trail of trauma, fear, and fascination that would not easily fade. The city of Los Angeles could finally begin to breathe again, but the memory of his crimes and the unprecedented trial that followed remained etched into the annals of California legal history. The final days before execution. DeWitt Clinton Cook's time at San Quentin Prison was marked by an eerie calm. Unlike many condemned men, he did not spiral into despair. He did not lash out or beg for mercy. Instead, he maintained a quiet, methodical routine that unnerved prison staff. He read extensively, listened to the radio, and observed the world outside through the narrow lens of his cell. The days were long. Guards noted that he rarely slept, often remaining awake late into the night. Breakfast was refused. Meals were taken mechanically, sometimes not all. Prison officials would later describe him as detached, almost meditative. To Cook, the inevitability of death was less a threat and more a certainty, a punctuation to a life already defined by violence and law. Appeals and clemency requests. Even as the final date approached, the legal process moved forward. Cook filed an appeal, arguing procedural points, but the courts denied it. He sought clemency through Governor Culbert L. Olson, claiming that his youth and potential for reform warranted reconsideration. In letters, he argued philosophically about life, punishment, and morality. He wrote, "If I were older by 20 years, I might not wish for a commutation, but I am a young man still. Life is life, whether in a penitentiary or elsewhere. I stand convicted of murder, but I am not a murderer in my heart. There is no doubt in my mind that when my term expired, I would emerge a better man in all ways, spiritually, mentally, and physically." The petition reflected a calm rationality. He did not beg. He did not plead in desperation. He merely reasoned, acknowledging his guilt but suggesting that life could still have purpose. Governor Olson granted a temporary reprieve on November 25, 1940, giving the legal system and Cook time to review any outstanding arguments. But by December 30th, Cook submitted a formal clemency request, which the governor ultimately denied on January 5, 1941. The state had made its decision. The death sentence would proceed. Life in the final hours. As January 31st approached, Cook's routine became almost ceremonial. He listened to a small radio through the night, staying awake and focused. There was no fear evident in his demeanor, no final conversations with guards or fellow prisoners. When asked about sleep or meals, he refused, stating simply, "I have made up my mind. I have to go." Prison staff later described him as composed to the very end, a stark contrast to the chaos he had once caused in Los Angeles. The man who had stalked streets, attacked women, and terrorized the city was now silent, confined to a cell awaiting the final act of state justice. Execution. At 10:02 a.m., January 31st, 1941, DeWitt Clinton Cook was led to the gas chamber at San Quentin. The chamber itself was clinical and cold. Guards followed protocol meticulously, ensuring that every legal and procedural requirement was met. Cook's final moments were reportedly serene. He did not plead, cry, or scream. There was no visible panic. His eyes, observed by those present, reflected acceptance rather than fear. The execution proceeded with precision, marking the end of a life that had left deep scars on the city he had once roamed freely. Legacy and public reaction. Cook's execution brought closure for some, but it did not erase the terror he inflicted. Los Angeles had endured months of fear, uncertainty, and random brutality. Families mourned, survivors healed slowly, and the city's streets slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy. Newspapers covered the event extensively. Commentators debated the nature of his crimes, his apparent detachment, and the implications for law enforcement. Psychologists and criminologists examined his upbringing, his early brushes with the law, and his capacity for violence. Cook became a case study in the unpredictable and chilling nature of human behavior, a reminder that evil can hide behind the most ordinary facades. Impact on legal history. Beyond its criminal significance, the case marked a turning point in California legal practice. The use of sound motion pictures in the courtroom, first employed during Cook's trial, demonstrated the power of visual and auditory evidence in helping jurors comprehend complex events. Future cases would rely on similar methods, cementing Cook's trial as a watershed moment in forensic presentation. Cultural memory. Over time, DeWitt Clinton Cook's story became less about the individual crimes and more about their social and legal repercussions. Law enforcement procedures, courtroom techniques, and public awareness of violent crime all evolved because of the months he spent terrorizing Hollywood. His crimes, trial, and execution entered popular memory as a chilling example of both human malevolence and the justice system's capacity to respond. Reflections. In hindsight, Cook's life and actions illustrate the tension between ordinariness and monstrosity. A man seemingly average in his daily existence could, under certain conditions, commit unthinkable acts. The city of Los Angeles, the police department, and the judicial system were all tested by the randomness and brutality of his crimes. Yet, the resolution, his capture, trial, and execution also demonstrated society's ability to impose order and justice, however late or imperfect. Though his name faded from headlines over time, the story of DeWitt Clinton Cook remains a cautionary tale, a grim reminder of the thin line between normalcy and darkness, and the extraordinary lengths to which the law must sometimes go to protect its citizens. The aftermath and reflection. After DeWitt Clinton Cook's execution on January 31st, 1941, Los Angeles exhaled collectively. Streets that had been haunted by fear slowly returned to life. Women walked more freely at night, children played in yards without the constant shadow of threat, and neighborhoods began to regain the sense of security that had been shattered months before. Yet, the scars of his violence remained. Survivors like Delia Bogard and Myrtle Wagner carried physical and emotional wounds for the rest of their lives. Delia would never forget the terror of that dark street, nor the searing pain of the blow to her head. Myrtle had to rely on a cane for weeks, each step a reminder of her sudden, unprovoked suffering. Families of victims mourned, remembering the lives cut short, the laughter stolen, and the ordinary moments destroyed by a single man's cruelty. A city changed. Los Angeles itself was changed. The Cook case forced the city to confront a reality it had long ignored. The danger could be random, invisible, and devastating. Police procedures evolved. Patrols increased in vulnerable neighborhoods, and law enforcement agencies developed better methods for linking seemingly unrelated crimes. For the first time, investigators used forensic evidence, witness accounts, and innovative courtroom technology to connect a string of violent acts to a single individual. The trial that shook California. Cook's trial remained a point of fascination and study for years. It was the first case in California to use sound motion pictures as evidence, allowing jurors to see and hear the events as they unfolded. The courtroom became a theater of truth, combining documentation, reenactment, and confession into a chilling, unforgettable presentation. Legal scholars studied the case for decades, emphasizing its role in shaping modern courtroom procedure. The jury's ability to see Cook demonstrate his own crime in real time with audio highlighted the power of immersive evidence. It set a precedent that would ripple through California's legal system, influencing how complex or violent crimes were prosecuted in the years that followed. The man behind the crimes. DeWitt Clinton Cook's life and psychology fascinated criminologists. Born in Waterloo, Iowa, a troubled youth, moved to Los Angeles at 16. Suffering the trauma of his father's death, his path seemed ordinary, yet it veered into darkness. Early brushes with the law, an unstable home life, and the isolation of a modest existence combined with a latent propensity for violence to create a man who could, without clear motive, terrorize a city. Experts later described Cook as methodical, emotionless, and detached, a man who viewed his actions as tasks rather than moral choices. His confession revealed no remorse beyond concern for being caught. He claimed panic, not guilt, when victims made noise. In this cold detachment, he embodied the terrifying idea that evil need not scream to be heard. A chilling reminder. Cook's story also became a cautionary tale in popular culture. Writers, journalists, and radio programs recounted the events with a mixture of horror and fascination. Los Angeles in the late 1930s was no longer just a city of film stars and glitz. It had a darker chapter, reminding residents that danger often lurks where least expected. Families and survivors were left with questions about prevention, justice, and fate. How could a man so ordinary, so seemingly invisible, inflict such destruction? How could the city have missed the signs? Cook's life, crimes, and trial provoked reflection on the fragile boundary between normalcy and catastrophe. Lessons in justice. The legal system, meanwhile, learned to adapt. Police refined investigative methods. Prosecutors explored innovative courtroom strategies. The public became more vigilant, more aware. And while justice was carried out, it was tempered by the recognition that no single verdict could fully erase the impact of a string of violent, senseless acts. Cook's execution closed the legal chapter, but the human chapter, the trauma, the fear, and the memory persisted. His crimes left an indelible mark on Hollywood, the legal system, and criminal psychology studies. Final reflections. In the end, the story of DeWitt Clinton Cook is not just about a man who committed murder and assault. It is about a city, a legal system, and a society forced to confront the unpredictable, the violent, and the deeply human capacity for both evil and justice. It is about how ordinary life can be interrupted by darkness, how fear spreads silently, and how determination, vigilance, and innovation in the law can restore some measure of safety and closure. Cook's story remains a chilling reminder that evil can often hide in plain sight, that justice must sometimes adapt to extraordinary circumstances, and that the shadow of violence lingers long after the act itself. Los Angeles learned hard lessons in those months of 1939 to 1941. The city survived, lives were rebuilt, but the memory of that winter, the terror, and the trial that changed legal history endured, etched into the history of Hollywood, and the cautionary tales of a city that had seen the face of darkness in one of its most ordinary residents.